used to it. Like, if I have to read the spec to adopt this, then the developers, by and large, will not adopt this, right? Because very few of us actually go and read these specs. And so Picture was designed as something that was, designed to be easier. If you already knew video, you knew Picture, you could work with it just fine. There's a lot of arguing about this for most of this year. And recently, the two parties have come to a compromise, and there will be some solutions now where you can use both of these. So you can use media queries to do things like M-based layouts. You can't do M-based media queries with source set. So if you're actually a big fan of using M-based layouts, then you can do that. And then you can use these to actually deal with the resolution of the display. So I know my screen width, but if I have a retina display, send a retina-sized image down. Otherwise, if it's just a normal display that most of us don't have, then send a normal image down. Now, I can actually show you this. Source set is not implemented in any browser, but because the Responsive Images community group is working so hard to get the W3C to pick this up, which they have, there was a custom build of Chromium built that you can use to test this out. Now, I'll tell you this right now. Don't ask me now because I don't have a lot of time. There is a difference between Chrome and Chrome Canary and Chromium. They are actually different things. And they're all based on another open source browser called WebKit. Well, that's another conversation for another time. But Chromium is more common on Linux distributions. There's actually not a version of Chrome for Linux. Most Linux devs that want a Chrome-like browser use Chromium. So if I have this turned on, if I actually am using this custom build of Chromium, which you can actually get on this page if you go to demos.responsiveimages.org, is I can check out any of these demos to see what's actually happening. So if I click on this grid system demo, I see my nice fancy image here. This is the picture tag that's actually being surfaced to the browser. And if I open up my DevTools, I'm going to open up the network tab so you can actually see what's happening here. And I'm on about 1280. So what I got is the tablet version of the image, which is about 40K. If I was on a larger resolution, I would see a larger image. But you'll notice that that's the image that's provided, right? So because of the qualities of my device, I got the tablet-sized image. Now, if I go smaller and refresh, and scale it back down so you can see this, is now I'm getting, come on now, the mobile version of the image, which is only 6K versus even 30K. Versus the high-res image, which is 250K. Right, and this is all happening in the browser. I don't have anything on the server. I don't have to query the device. I don't have to find out what device is actually giving this to me. All I'm doing is defining a set of conditional rules to deal with this. And that's really exciting. The last thing, well, second to last thing we're going to talk about is web components. And this is one I'm not going to spend a lot of time on because it's just like crazy mind-melting stuff. This is another thing that Google is working on very heavily. You can check it out at webcomponents.github.com. And the whole idea here with web components is to give us developers the ability, two things. One is to give us extensibility in HTML markup. So we can actually define custom elements that don't have to be vetted through the W3C before we can use them, is one thing. And the second thing we get is encapsulation of functionality. So we can actually define widgets and units of functionality that we distribute to other developers and other teams that are encapsulated. They're locked away from the other developers from their use. This is maybe actual markup that they're using, but they can't access it. So that actually that's four pieces that makes up. One is templates. So we actually are talking about getting first-class template support now. Instead of using embedded script tags, we can actually have a template element that we can work with to actually access other DOM elements, and this would be first class. Second is custom elements, which I mentioned. So this actually gives us a syntax for using this element tag and defining that it extends an existing HTML tag. So I can define a new element that extends the button, so it gets all the functionality of the button element, but I want to call it X fancy button. So I add some scoped styles to it, I add some extra markup, and then when I declare it, I'm just using a button, but I'm using this is attribute to say it's a type of X fancy button, and now I've got this nice fancy button on the screen. Question?
How are browsers going to know what to do with it?
Well, there's specs for that. So there's very, very specific parsing rules. Effectively, what they know to do with it, if I do this, because ultimately this will be on two different pages. This is my button that's on, I'm in developer who's consuming this widget, and I downloaded this widget as a separate .html file in another page, and that somebody else created for me, some open source developer. what the browser will do when it sees this is, all right, I'm going to create a button, but because it's a fancy button, I need to actually now use this template to actually render that to the screen. So I'll give you the button, and then I'm going to add this extra functionality based on that. And this little content tag here is actually how it inserts the rest of the button. So it takes the button, it puts it in here, and it adds all this other stuff from the template as well. And that's how the browser knows to work with it. I understand the sentiment that you're feeling right now because I am still trying to figure out what the heck this all means. I promise. I'm showing you this because this is stuff that actually I have every expectation is going to be mainstream in the next year.
Next year?
Or two.
Or two.
Because, honestly, Google has the clout and the market share now to do really whatever they want. And
They can't make the other guys do it, though.
well, actually, they're getting pretty good at figuring out how. So do you know what Mozilla's #1 source of revenue is? Google. So they're a non-profit company, but they get about $250 million a year from Google.
In grants?
AdSense?
AdSense. Ad revenue. Because Mozilla by default uses Google to do all their web searches. And so to pay for that privilege, Google gives them $250 million a year. And so now, I'm sort of oversimplifying the relationship there because they're also both very open companies, and so they get along much more so than either would with Microsoft or Apple, who are browser vendors but are very proprietary in their approach to the browser. And so it tends to be, the scenario now tends to be whatever Google does, Mozilla does as well, with a few exceptions. And I'll talk about one of those in just a second. But I'm sharing this stuff, and I'm going to skip decorators because that's just... and then the last piece is one that I'm actually going to show you a second. And this is something that's in the browser today. So I mentioned encapsulation. And part of the reason why this is possible is through something called the shadow DOM. And the shadow DOM is like a DOM within a DOM. So you can actually create your own little hidden DOMs inside of the page that can be used to display functionality to the user, but can't be accessed and styled by the developer. I am going to demo that because it is worth seeing. I'll show you that very briefly. And I'm going to demo it by showing you an HTML5 video tag. Because if I open this video tag up in the DevTools, and you'll see this, you can see this in Chrome Stable today. This little gear here in Chrome is actually how you access Chrome's DevTools settings. And there's an option here where I can turn on and off accessing the shadow DOM. You can do this today in Chrome Stable. If I click that button, on an element like video, what I'll see now is this thing called shadow root. So, and then inside of there I see this div, and another div, and another div. And look at that, an input button. This is the play button on the HTML5 video tag is a button. It's just an HTML5 button. That's how the browsers have actually implemented these fancy new HTML5 controls, is by using the same controls and tags that we've been using for 15 years and just wrapping those in extra functionality and then packaging all of that up in a shadow DOM and hiding it from you. So you can't access it. Like I can't style this button. It's hidden from me. I can use it, I can interact with it as a user, but as a developer I can't do anything to this unless a developer gives me the ability to do so. So the rule here, and the reason why I'm showing this, and there's some stuff you can do in Chrome Canary today to build some of these yourself, but the idea is that as a developer, and so like for me, example, and the reason why I care about this and why I'm researching it is because my company, Kenda UI, I mean, we provide widgets. And what we have like a drop-down control or a calendar control. So if you drop a calendar control on your page, let's say you're using jQuery UI, and you do jQuery UI.calendar. What jQuery does with the JavaScript is they're actually adding extra elements to the DOM and then throwing those on the page. And so you don't see this unless you view, source, or inspect in the DevTools, but that extra functionality, that widget is being implemented as actual DOM elements. If I go and then override the styles on those pages, I can really muck with that a great deal, or I can mess with it. And it also adds a lot of cruft that the user may not care about, or even the developer doesn't want to see. Right? It feels a little weird to have this extra stuff that I didn't ask for. I just asked for a calendar control. So what Shadow DOM gives me the ability to do as a widget developer is to create a calendar control that when you instantiate, preserves your div. This, you add a source in jQuery, you say make this a calendar or make this input a calendar, and as far as you're concerned, it's still just an input. All that extra stuff has been added, but it's behind the scenes, in the shadows. And that's really the advantage of what Shadow DOM gives you, which is really crazy. I know I keep saying that a lot, but that's what this stuff is to me.
I have a question about that. The Shadow DOM, like if you were to, is there a way that the developers of these widgets would be able to expose certain things that could be styled?
That's a great question. I wonder if maybe I should just go ahead and do the demo. I was going to do really quick anyway. Do I have a few minutes of like wiggle room? Can we stay until like 10:30?
We have time today.
Can we stay until 10:30? Is that okay? Like,
Yeah,
I
you can stay until
2.5 hours.
10:30. Yeah.
All right, I got a little bit of time. I get really excited about this. Sanjay learned this at lunch today. Is that you actually have to make me stop talking, but I'm close. I promise you, sir. I'm close. That is a great question. You do have the ability to actually allow functionality to sort of poke out through there. So, for instance, the way that you work with a Shadow DOM today, and this is something that you have to use Chrome Canary for, you have to turn it on. There is a Chrome flag or about flag for Enable Shadow DOM. And I add a host element, and then I add some JavaScript to actually work with this. And for what I get here for Shadow DOM is I get this, again, vendor prefixed shadow root. Shadow root is the element that I can use to say, I'm going to create a Shadow DOM underneath here. So I'm basically saying here, I'm creating a whole new DOM. I'm going to put that somewhere on the page. The next thing that I'm doing is I'm creating a new paragraph tag. I'm giving it some content, and then I'm appending it to, and then I'm taking that and appending it to the root. So this has been turned into a Shadow DOM. If I don't have Shadow DOM support enabled in Chrome and I can't see it, all I'm going to see here is a div tag, but I'll see the text inside of that paragraph. So let me prove it to you. Save, refresh. So I have that element here. Now because I have Shadow DOM support enabled, or I can at least see it, I can open this up and I can go in there and notice it's not actually there, it's inside of that shadow root. And for additional proof, let me actually select document, cannot spell, query selector. Just give me all the p tags on the page. There are none. As far as the main DOM is concerned, there are no p tags on the page. Now, I can select it by calling document query selector div, accessing that as a shadow root and then querying, but effectively it's hidden from me. There's nothing I can do with it in my main styling. If I add a different paragraph tag, right, that's outside of that shadow root or shadow host, and I do the same thing, I now do have one. I do have a paragraph tag on the page, just to prove to you that that code is actually good, it's not broken code. Now, the default advantage I get with the Shadow DOM is when I do something like this, I want to style all my paragraph tags by making them 48 pixels and giving them the color blue, is that I don't have the ability to do that by default with the Shadow DOM. This is not accessible to me with my CSS as well. CSS is outside of the bounds of that. But, to answer your original question, I can use this property called root.applyAuthorStyles equals true. And when I say apply author styles, what I'm saying is go ahead and apply any CSS that's been defined on this element as well. So I can sort of provide some styling capabilities. I can still hide those. I can't manipulate that DOM. I can't remove elements from the DOM or anything like that. But I can apply CSS, so at least I can get a consistent look and feel on those widgets if I'm adding them, as I'm adding them to my application. Does that answer your question?
Yeah.
Cool.
Does jQuery have access to the Shadow DOM?
Well, jQuery is just a wrapper on document.getElementById. Yeah.
So it wouldn't.
Class. Yeah.
So it would.
Yes, the same thing. Yeah, would not have access to it unless you specifically provide it. So that's the benefit of that level of encapsulation that you get with these things.
How about being able to style specific tags inside the Shadow DOM and not just everything?
Yeah, you do get that level of control.
Specific
That,
to it?
though, yeah, you can say, you know, I'm going to expose these things. The way you do that is with templates. That's part of the reason why templates are so bad. So the reason I mention those things together in web components, the reason I mention templates and Shadow DOM and custom elements, is because those things actually all work together. And one of the ways it does that is to give you the ability to define either custom data that gets intermixed with those elements, so custom tags, or also custom styles as well. So you can scope certain styles and things like that. That stuff's not actually supported yet, because it's really, right now, it's just creating shadow roots and manipulating them and things like that. But all that stuff is in those specs. And if you go to that webcomponents.github.com, all of the specs are linked from there. And there's actually, you don't have to read the specs. I'm not a big fan of reading specs, but there actually is an explainer. The guy that wrote these specs from Google actually wrote this really nice explainer document that walks through all these technologies and explains them quite well. He's much smarter than I am, so I still don't get like 60% of it, but enough to where I can feel like I'm not an idiot sharing it with you guys. So we'll go through that quickly. Now the last thing, the really honest to God, last thing that I'm going to talk about is devices. Because it's now, you can't have a conversation about HTML5 without talking about devices. And not just browsers, but what HTML5 is doing to native application experiences as well. So we're all familiar, I'm sure, with what Microsoft is doing with Windows 8. Making HTML, JavaScript, and CSS first-class programming paradigms on the platform. Right? I can write JavaScript and HTML and get access to the same APIs that a C# or VB.NET developer gets on the platform. That's pretty heady stuff, and I give Microsoft a lot of credit for making that decision, because that opens up their platform to a lot more developers than they've ever had in their history. They're not the only ones doing it. As I mentioned already, Chrome with Chrome OS is really doubling down on trying to build an experience and trying to build consumer-grade devices that somebody can go and buy for $250 at a Best Buy, and they have a full operating system that's really nothing more than a browser. I mean, the entire Chrome OS operating system is a browser. It is Chrome. It is the Google Chrome browser that makes you feel like it's a desktop, but you don't have file system access. You can't connect your webcam, and you can do things like that, connect your camera and pull in pictures and things like that, but it's all cloud-based. And it's connected to Google Drive and all this kind of stuff. As I mentioned already, the webcam application that we built for Google is actually, it's shipping, it's in there, right? It's going to be, the idea that Google had in asking us to build that was to offer the same kind of experience that, when you used to, remember in the early days when Apple stores were new and you'd go in the store and you'd open up, what's that photo app that no one ever uses anymore? I have it.
iPhone.
Not iPhoto, not that one, but where you take pictures. Yeah, photo booth, thank you. Yeah, they have photo booth open on their 30-inch displays and you take pictures and perform effects and stuff. And that's what Google's trying to do, offer the same sort of in-store experience to people and using web technologies to do so. The last piece, this is where we come back to Mozilla, is that Mozilla is actually taking the boldest move of all, and that is their Firefox OS project. And they're literally trying to build an entire phone operating system using nothing but HTML, JavaScript, and CSS. Yes. Now, none of these are on the market. There's a simulator I'll show you in just a second. But where this benefits us as developers is their Web API initiative. Because as a result of their effort, what they're doing is they're going through every single piece of a hardware device and figuring out, how do we write a spec? They're very good about this. Microsoft did not write a lot of specs when they released Windows 8. They've contributed their share, but Mozilla is very spec first. Let's write a spec that gives us access to making phone calls through the browser, telephony features, sending SMS messages, dealing with payment and accessing FM radio, battery status, the contacts API. All of this stuff they're writing as specs, and they're pushing this stuff through the W3C with the intention that all browsers will offer these up as first-class APIs in the browser. So the sky's the limit in terms of what you can do. There will no longer be a barrier between what you can access in the browser and what a native desktop developer can access. And this is really exciting. You can check out arewemobileyet.com. That's Mozilla's site where they're tracking the status of all of those APIs, and there's a lot more. And I'll show you, actually, I'm going to show you a demo of that. Because if you're running the latest version of Firefox, and this is not Firefox Nightly, but the actual Firefox app. Oh no. No. I mentioned earlier you can only have one instance of Firefox running at a time. Try again. Is that if you're running Firefox, I believe it's 16 or later, or maybe it's 15 or later, you can go to the Firefox OS project used to be called Boot to Gecko or B2G. So if you want to install the Firefox OS simulator, it's called R2D2B2G. R2D2, yeah, B2G. And that actually takes you, this is where you can download it from. You download it and install it, and once you've installed it, you can actually, it adds to your tools menu this Firefox OS simulator. And when I turn this on, I get this manage, I can actually install apps inside of here. So they're building, and as part of this process, Mozilla is building an app store. And the ability to write, same as what you can do with Microsoft, same as what you're doing with Chrome now with Chrome OS. You can write apps, full-on native apps, HTML, JavaScript, CSS, and load those up on the phone and install those, deploy them to their app store. Users can install them from the app store as well. So when I turn this simulator on, hopefully, cool, it's going to open up a new screen, and this is Firefox OS. This is a full-on phone operating system written in nothing but web technologies. The code to actually map these key presses to waves, to sounds, is actually just JavaScript. All of these features. What's crazy, the inception piece of this is this part, right? The Firefox browser written in an OS that's written in HTML, JavaScript, which means the browser that renders HTML, JavaScript, and CSS is written using HTML, JavaScript, and CSS. That's great. That's Firefox OS. I definitely recommend keeping an eye on that because that is just, that's amazing, amazing stuff. And I give Microsoft, Google, and Mozilla a ton of credit for pushing this. I mean, it's these factors and this stuff at the end and the relationship to mobile is part of the reason why I think this stuff is coming faster than we might think. And that's really the point that I am making today, is that all of this stuff, it may seem way out there. It may seem like there's no way that I'm going to see this in the next 2 to 3 years. And it might land on our doorstep in the next 6 months. I don't think it's anything to be afraid of because, again, these are all opt-in technologies. If your company, if your organization, if your clients aren't ready for these things, you don't have to use them. No one's going to force you to. But you do need to be aware of what's out there because it can save us a lot of headaches and the capabilities that we can provide. And that's really the point. That's really why I want us to be paying attention to these things. This is why I pay attention to these things, so that when we are looking at creating new releases of Kendo UI, and the things that we work on, we're paying attention to not what we can deliver to our customers today, but what our customers are going to be banging down our door a year from now, asking why we didn't do 6 months ago. And that's the stuff that I really pay attention to. So, the slides for tonight, you can get at bit.ly/bleedinghtml5. And all of this stuff, all these demos that I walked through, I wrote out actually a full demo script on how you can do all this stuff yourself. And you can get that at github.com/bsatrom/bleedinghtml5. So, it'll give you all the instructions on which browser you need to use and how to turn on the right flags and all that stuff. So please check that out, and I'm happy to answer any questions. Yeah?
So on your sound recording demo, I know on like my phone, if I say exclamation point, it turns it into an exclamation point. I was wondering, does that feature exist in that?
I did not try that. That is an awesome idea. Why don't I think of this? Should I try it? You want me to try it real quick?
Yeah, I'm curious.
Why not? Hi there! Exclamation point. Very nice. So, again, and actually probably that makes sense. The reason why that works is because it's the native speech-to-text capabilities of Mountain. And it's ultimately just exposing all that. So that's a cool, I'm glad you asked that. It's an awesome question. Thank you. It's almost like I paid you to ask me that.
I'll be happy to take money.
I'm sure. Absolutely. How about you? That's it. Again, you can find me on Twitter as Brandon Satrom. Email me anytime, brandon@kendoui.com. I love talking about this stuff. Yes?
The web API, I mean, that sounds like it would have a lot of security issues.
All of HTML5 has horrible security issues. It's not true. I'm just kidding. That is a valid question because there's a lot of stuff like WebGL. Part of Microsoft's stated reason for not adopting WebGL in spite of all that DirectX stuff I just told you is because they think that WebGL has security risks. But it doesn't have any more security risks than Silverlight does. The same backdoors for WebGL are the backdoors you can get into a Silverlight-based application with today. And so a lot of those security risks are sometimes political moves from one browser to the other. However, you're absolutely right. And so one of the things that is the reason why I love the W3C process is because they talk about that stuff to ad infinitum, and they will talk about security. They will not let stuff become standard candidate recommendations or beyond until they feel like security holes have been addressed. Websockets is another example. Websockets actually was implemented in Chrome and Firefox, and then some security holes were discovered, and both of the browsers pulled it. And they actually, to be honest, following the process, they should not have implemented it as soon as they did because it was very early in the standardization process. So there are going to be security concerns and holes just like with any new technology, but the beauty of the standards process and the fact that we have multiple browsers looking at this and working on it and other great companies like Adobe and IBM and many, many others is that they're going to see these things, they're going to pay laser attention to what it means to them because they're not going to take on security risk any more than any of us would in our own lives. So, does that answer your question? Anything else? Yes?
What's new with Windows 8 on the Surface and things like that?
You have to buy my book. I'm just kidding. What do you mean, like?
Is there going to be any unique thing that comes with.
Ah, okay. So, you know, I give Microsoft a lot of credit because when it comes to IE10, which is the rendering engine for both their browser, that's the same Trident rendering engine as the Metro style applications written for Windows 8, is that they've actually been very good about following the standards process and not deviating from it too much.
Wow.
So there's not a lot that they've added that is just completely brand new and you've never seen before. One exception is they do have first-class support for what's called the CSS grid layout specification. And the grid layout specification is a CSS spec that actually allows you to define what we used to do in table-based layouts, right? Is we put these big tables and TDs and TRs on pages so that we could get our layout exactly right. We needed to get an element into certain things. We created a bunch of empty crap on our pages just to get something like 3/4 of the way down because we didn't have a way to do it before. Grid layout gives me the ability to specify a semantic grid for my page without using markup and use CSS to define how wide the grid is, how tall it is, how many cells, how many columns, how many rows, and then with child elements to say very specifically, place this in column 2, row 3. And so that is something, and that actually makes perfect sense to me why Microsoft did that and didn't wait for it to be standardized. Because so much of their app story is about building full screen native applications. There was nothing in HTML that made that easy for a web developer before. Most of the time when we build browser-based apps, we're still kind of constraining ourselves to a lowest common denominator in terms of screen size. You know? But with something when it's native, you're going full screen. And to make it full screen and to make it really flexible and extensible and maintainable, they needed to do something. That's what they chose to do. So that's the one real key difference.
So it's true that Windows 8 works with devices, pretty much any device, including desktop PCs and mobile devices?
Yeah, so the beauty of Microsoft's approach with Windows is very different than Apple's in the sense that they wanted to really sort of one operating system to rule them all, right? So it is a desktop operating system that also works on tablets and slates. There is an exception to that that I don't know that I want to get into too much now, but it is that if actually you're running the Surface, you are running Windows 8, but it's not Windows 8 that can run QuickBooks, right? Because you actually don't have access to old desktop applications on the Surface that's out today. Microsoft is releasing a Surface in a couple of months. This is where they're being very confusing. And again, forgive me, I'm not bitter. I love Microsoft. I enjoy working for them. They do a lot of stupid stuff as a company of 90,000 people. I'm so happy I can say that freely now. I thought it when I worked for them, but I just kind of had to keep my mouth shut. Is this being recorded again? I'm asking that. There is going to be another kind of Surface called the Surface Pro that actually will support full-on Windows 8 with desktop, install anything you want on it. And it'll look very similar to the Surface that's out there today. The difference is that the Surface of today, what they're calling the Surface with Windows RT, is it's an ARM-based chipset. So it actually cannot run x64, 64-bit and x86 apps. Whereas what you'll get with that Surface Pro is a full-on computer with an Intel-based low-power chip that probably still will have a fan and heat your lap. But I'm sort of editorializing a little bit. I can't help myself. Does that answer your question? So
yeah, sure.
It's kind of an odd, confusing mix of stuff.
What about TypeScript? That catching on?
It is in the Microsoft community, and we have a lot. So as a purveyor of JavaScript tools, we do have a lot of customers that are .NET developers and are doing ASP.NET MVC development, and we get a lot of requests to add TypeScript support into Kendo UI, which for us is just building definition files. It's not all that different than building building VS IntelliSense files like we did before, so that you could get statement completion. It is catching on, and I was very skeptical at first, but I actually applaud Microsoft at trying to innovate JavaScript. I love CoffeeScript for the same reason, because it's not an attempt to try to replace JavaScript and say, oh, the JavaScript stinks, use this instead. That's what Dart and other things like that are for. What TypeScript and CoffeeScript do in a lot of ways is say, let's experiment with what's possible. Let's play with what could be done in JavaScript and see those things maybe make their way into the ECMAScript standardization group. Anything else? Yes?
The video that you had, the conference, can you do like multiple conferences at the same time?
Yeah. If someone else, I was actually almost half expecting somebody to kind of jump on that same URL and sort of add like a third phase. Not many people have their screens open, but yeah, you can add. I don't know the limit because it is still just a prototype. It's just a demo. Yeah, you can add multiple. It's all peer-to-peer to peer-to-peer to peer-to-peer connections. I don't know how performant it is, but yeah.
When are we going to see it on Google Hangouts?
So another one of the reasons why, so WebRTC is another Google spec, and Google is very different from Microsoft in that key way, in the sense that Microsoft will write a spec first and sort of wait for it to go through. Google will implement something and then write a spec. So you saw that with speech. You've seen that with WebRTC is the same way. So what they're doing today with Google Hangouts is actually expecting, they're expecting all that to be a lot easier once WebRTC is actually fully supported. But if you're using a browser that supports WebRTC, like for now, Chrome 75,000, like whatever I have on my desktop, if I open up a Google Hangout, it is actually using WebRTC. It's using Get User Media, and it's using WebSockets to pipe that back. And I don't know, have you seen any on Google Hangouts any of the effects that you can add? Like you can put like crowns on people's heads and stuff like that. That's using WebGL. So they are using these technologies in the apps that we use every day, and that's pretty exciting. So. All right, that's it. Thank you all so much. I appreciate staying.